How do you define success in email? That's the topic for today's Email Never Sleeps. I'm Andrew Kordick with iPost, and I have the distinct pleasure of chatting with Tammi Miller today. Tammy and I, full disclosure, we worked together at Trendline Interactive a few years ago. Phenomenal strategist. So, Tammy, I would like to introduce Tammi Miller, the head of lifecycle marketing at All Trails. Tammy, introduce yourself. Give us a little background about yourself.
Sure. I'm Tammy, head of lifecycle at All Trails right now. Fell into email kind of like we all did accidentally, I think. So started as a designer and focused on UX and websites and things. Rolled into email and was a team of one, just like most of us are from the start, doing a little bit of everything. And yeah, never left it. That was about 17 years ago, and has not left it since. So I've been on brand side, on agency side, back on brand side now. So kind of done a little bit of everything and played every role in the process.
It's awesome. Yeah, and you and I were chatting before this, right? And we were thinking 16 years, and me with 23 years. We've been around the block. We've seen a lot of it. But, the topic today is, defining success, right? And as we are getting more and more seasoned into our roles, and as we deal with more and more things, you probably have some things that you use to define success in email. And I'm curious, what are they? Let's talk about them, because they might be a little different from mine, or they might be the same. So what do you think about defining success?
Yeah, I would say like really how I kind of initially just think about email and email strategy
Mm-hmm.
all goes back to the customer or the user, and really just understanding like what is their experience, what does their life cycle look like, what are some of their challenges, what are their hurdles that they're going through, and just really thinking about how do we use email to support that journey, and really support the customer as much as possible. So we all talk about value in email and relevant emails and all of that, but it's really figuring out what is it that the customer needs and how can we kind of utilize our channel to drive that support and kind of nudge them along a path to some key actions that we want them to take.
So if I was a marketer, right, and you mentioned the word find out what their needs are, right? I mean, I think we can all agree that every customer, whether you've got 500,000 or 5 million on your list, right, they all have unique challenges, and they all have unique needs, right? So as a marketer, maybe a younger marketer, somebody with not a lot of experience, like how do you understand or uncover these needs? Like what should they be looking at or looking for as they sort of define their strategy?
So I think it's really just kind of looking at putting yourself in the customer's perspective. Like that's kind of my favorite way to start out. I think some of that comes from my UX background, I think, but like really kind of walking through the process of what it's like for a new customer who doesn't know your brand to first get that introduction. At what point is that email capture coming up, and simple things like that. What is that experience if they do make a purchase or maybe leave and don't make a purchase? So I feel like the easiest thing you could do is just walk through the steps, like, go through some of the things that maybe there's things that exist and triggers and messages already. But just kind of walk through that and see what that experience is for yourself. And then just marry that with the data. I mean, it's all looking at behaviors, like what are our users doing? Like, what are they doing when we send an email, when they click that email? What are those actions that they're taking, like within the product itself?
Yep.
And where might there be hurdles along the way that we could kind of utilize our messaging to help them?
You make a good point. Let me piggyback off that for just a quick second, right? We talk about going through the experience of signing up. And I've always encouraged everybody to continuously sign up for their brand, and sign up for other brands too, not just competitive brands. But more importantly, what you might want to do is, I call it the shoulder test. Stand over a friend, an aunt, an uncle, a mom, a dad, a spouse, or whatever, and say, you know what, go to my site, right? If you want to learn about what I do, go to my site. Don't prompt them to do anything, and just say, sign up for email. Tell me, and watch them do it. Watch them kind of go through, and then watch them as they enter their email address, and then what happens. what is that experience, not just from you and I as the marketer, but from the actual consumer, somebody that might actually be involved in the brand that you represent. And I guarantee it's a whole different ballgame when you start to see that. You can do your sort of litmus test of 1 or 5 sort of people. So I'm a big experience guy as well, right? We, meaning you and I, know where to kind of go to sign up for email, meaning you and I know what kind of to expect or what not to expect. And I am always fascinated when I see things, right? Like, so I watch sometimes my wife kind of go through email and I see her delete stuff. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, what's going on? She's like, I get too much email from this brand. Or I've kind of watched my mom sign up for stuff. It's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So the success, I think, that you're kind of alluding to is it starts with experience and then it's coupled on top with data. So tell me about, we've all heard this term journey mapping and data and the use of data. Tell me what sort of pieces of data you would look for first in order to define what that subscriber is wanting or needing. Is there anything in particular you would look towards?
I think a lot of where I kind of end up starting is trying to define like what those key actions are that we're trying to drive. Like in some cases that might just be a purchase. In other cases, it might be something specific. We want them to engage with something. We want them to utilize a feature or something else. Once you kind of understand what those key actions are, it's almost kind of walking backwards from that. Who is taking those key actions and what are they doing right before that?
Yeah.
And I think starting to kind of, unpack that a little bit and understanding like what those paths are, how people are getting there, makes you start to also uncover where are they dropping off, what, where they may be like reaching some hurdles and things that they can use some help on.
Do you think there should be a key differentiation of messaging or tone or how you speak with the subscriber at certain stages based off of the data that they choose? Because a lot of people just tend to kind of funnel them all into one sort of 1, 2, 3 type of emails, right? Based off of what the general people are doing from a journey perspective. What do you think about messaging and differentiation of messaging for the first, let's say, 30, 60, 90 days based off of their actions? I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, so really like as complex as you could get with different messaging and, being strategic and just the way you speak to different groups of people based on those actions they're taking.
Mm-hmm.
The closer you could get to kind of that personalization, no, that's a buzzword, but as close as you could get to that, the better. But I think it doesn't have to start out super complex. It could be as simple as, serving them up an email or two, waiting for them to take an action. Did they take the action? Yes. Maybe we follow up with something else. Did they not? Let's follow up with something else. So I think it can be kind of overwhelming when you start to think about like, oh God, how am I going to talk to all these people in different ways and serve up all these different messaging and these different experiences?
Yeah.
But really kind of simplifying that down to like a couple of steps in that, especially in that initial kind of engagement with the customer, and starting there and building on top of it.
It's like you and I are reading each other's minds, right? Like I know that we hear the word personalization or unique or individualization, or kind of chopped it up into 20 different segments. That is overwhelming. That is really hard to do because you have to have the differentiation of messages, whether they're email number 3 or email 23, right? Is the ability to chop it up in general segments and then try to differentiate what we think the winner is going to be. All right, so we've got experience, we've got data. What other ways would you define a success in an email program based off of all the years of your experience?
I think like I want to say curiosity. I don't know if that's like a
Okay.
kind of a success metric but I feel like as a marketer myself and like kind of to be successful as an email marketer, I think it takes a lot of curiosity. It takes a lot of testing and learning. It takes a lot of kind of figuring things out. It takes a lot of like, watching that kind of data and those behaviors, but also just kind of being curious with what happens next, what's going to follow that. How do I follow up on top of that? And how do I test into what I think is going to be the right experience and then quickly iterate on that and start building on top of it.
And you hear the word testing, and I know we've been beating this drum for years, right? People tend to freak out, right? They're like, oh my God, if I'm not testing, I feel like I'm a bad email marketer. And I'd like to assure everybody, and I'm not speaking for you, Tammy, but you might agree. Testing doesn't need to be every single email, every single week on all the different things. It's having a hypothesis, wanting to prove something, right? That you have a distinct and unique idea that is going to move the needle in your program, right? And then testing into that. And I think that's a really important aspect for people, whether you've got 5 years experience or 15 years experience in this industry. Is testing doesn't need to be daunting. What it needs to do is be productive. And I think that's wickedly important, because you see these surveys where they're like, well, how many marketers actually test emails? And your numbers always wickedly lower than you'd want it to be, right? And it's kind of like that freak out process. One thing I want to ask you, and then I have an opinion on this, is we've been through this pandemic, and we've seen brands come through the pandemic. However they came through it. Some came through positive, some came through negative. And there was this general feeling of genuineness in some brands, and other feelings of fake genuineness, right? And from a success aspect, I'm curious about what your thoughts are on brands moving towards a more genuine, humanized approach in their program. And if you think that's a part of the success, or maybe it could be a downfall. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I love it. I think authenticity in email is hugely important. I love to start to see that more brands are kind of leaning on that. To me, email is the perfect way to just build relationships with your customers, and you're never going to build those relationships by just by not being authentic with yourself, and not, putting some human to each of us. I think we all, started to have more compassion for others and things, and, force through some of the same things together. And, one of the positives from that, I think, is that kind of, allowing us to be more authentic. And it just allows you to connect better, I think, with your users directly.
But don't try to be overly authentic. I've seen brands, and I remember being called one time a try hard, right? You're trying too hard to be authentic, and it looks fake, right? And so there's this fine balance, right, of being authentic versus being kind of weird, right? And so this is where you kind of have to use some testing. And I'm certainly not going to try to be authentic and give you this sort of digital hug right off the bat, right? I mean, I think it's with loyalty, it's with a lot of different things that brands need to sort of experiment with. But being authentic and being human could also lead to the other side of the coin, where it's detrimental to your program, because people will make fun of it or whatever. But you're never going to please sort of anybody. All right, so let's wrap it up. I want to get your final thoughts, right? As you've seen this over your career, and as you kind of now are leading lifecycle marketing at All Trails, and the things that you're doing, what would you want to attack first? What are your final thoughts from being successful in an email program?
I think it's just kind of to always be looking inward, always be looking at the behaviors, the data, anything you can see from your own program, the test results if you're testing, really kind of turn to that and understand how that's going to drive your strategy forward, and make sure you always kind of have that view. I think one of the things I've seen change in myself and my strategy over the time is, kind of leaning more on trends and best practices, and, a list of things that you got to just check off to have a full completed email program. And, the longer I'm in this, the more I realize, like, that's not really one size does not fit all. So, it's really going to depend on your program, on your brand, and ultimately your customers. So as much as you can kind of turn in towards that data, those behaviors, doesn't have to be overwhelming. Just starting at looking at kind of who's engaging and how often they're engaging, what they're doing when they click that email. That's going to get you further than anything else, any other fancy shiny trick in the book.
Man, I think we're like our brains are aligned, but I want to add on to that. When we start talking about best practices, when we start talking about benchmarks, and whatever, we can go to the nth degree. I believe that there's fundamental best practices like don't buy lists, don't have authentication and stuff like that. But really, when it comes to best practices, whether you are a brand side, whether you sell shoes, socks, subscriptions, whatever, right? You have to create your own best practices. But I'd also like to add that this isn't. The people say there's email industry isn't changing, and it is. It totally is. There's lots of little tools, lots of shiny objects, lots of different things. Go back to the base, go back to the fundamentals, go back to the basics of blocking and tackling like sign up experience. Actually, what's your exit experience? Because people are going to unsubscribe. How do you make your mark as a brand? And then sort of everything in between. How do you treat and how do you differentiate really good customers, subscribers, people that have been loyal members of your email program differently than that of how you treat people that are new or maybe starting to get lapsed. It's all about trial and error. It's all about failure too. You are going to fail to become a better email marketer, and that's okay. You might have a test that will go off the rails. You'd be like, what in the world, right? So my final thought is be human yourself. Know that you're going to get pressure from above, right? Or from other people that believe they have an opinion about your email program. Stand strong. And when you think of success, focus in on one area to be successful in, because you can't be great at everything. You can be great at only a few different things. That's my final thought. And with that, Tammy, I'd love to continue conversations again in the future. I wanted to thank you for your time, certainly your knowledge to everybody. Please reach out to Tammy on LinkedIn should you have any additional questions, or myself. We'll post all the proper places for you guys to get a hold of us. But thank you again, everybody, for attending Email Never Sleeps. Look out for the next Email Never Sleeps that comes your way. Thanks again, Tammy.
Thank you.